Alright, so we're going to go through a quick example of running the sample code. Now you want to check out this repo and you want to open up the following folder inside an IDE of your choice. For the rest of the demo I'm going to use IntelliJ only because that's where I'm most comfortable, and I'm going to check this folder out inside IntelliJ. Right, now that I've got the folder open inside IntelliJ, I'm opening up the Maven pom.xml file. So what we want to concentrate on here is the dependencies as mentioned. We want to use the SDK core or SDK auth. So this is if we use the v2, and to get the versions, as you can see, we will use dependency management over here using the BOM. That is option 1. Option 2 is we can actually just use the entire AWS SDK, and that is as opposed to using just the 2 modules that we need. So I'm going to go with just the modules, but as you can see you have 2 options. This is just more efficient. The other thing then we need is AWS IAM auth. That's how we're going to authenticate with MSK. It's got the native libraries that are added to MSK to be able to authenticate. And then we need the schema registry CERD. So this is how we serialize and deserialize using the schema registry. Basically this code just interacts with AWS Glue on our behalf, does the authentication, fetches a specific version of the schema, and then deserializes the binary. So those are 3 very important things. The rest of it is just core Spring libraries. Depending on the application, these will change for you, but at a minimum, you probably just need Spring Boot Starter and Spring Kafka. So now I want to just focus on what's in the code. We have config, and this is the most important. As you can see here, we have application config. Now this is Spring application config, and we have in the resources folder application.yaml. So these are the dependencies from runtime config. As you can see, we have environment variables injected here. Now we will have to set a couple of environment variables so that they can be injected into our Spring application via the Spring framework. Now you'll see these will be used in other places. I'm going to go back to the application config. The most important part here really is this part. If you go look at the docs, you'll see the AWS docs and normal Kafka docs. Some of this will be quite familiar and some of it a little bit extra, quite foreign. But very importantly here, for some reason, you must set all 3 of these. The authentication doesn't work without it. The rest of this is just standard bootstrap servers, group IDs. This is schema registry specific extra properties. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on it, but the most important ones is the schema registry name, the fact that we're using Avro, and the fact that we want to deserialize to a generic record. The rest of it is important, but not worthy of chatting about. Then the authentication. This is very well documented by AWS, and this is the authentication method we're going to use. There is another authentication method you can use, but I prefer to use this one. And then there's the key deserialization. Now you want to look at the documentation published for the ADH solution. Each schema will have a different key data type. So I'm going to show you for the bets, and it's string. Then there are 2 options here for the deserializers. Now there's a little bit of Spring syntactic sugar and a little bit of a black box understanding the 2, but I'll try simplify it. So option 1 is for the value deserializer, you can tell it to deserializing using the Glue schema registry Kafka deserializer. Now this works fine unless there's an error. What happens in the deserialization process of Kafka is when there's an error, it bombs out and it retries endlessly. Now this is not ideal. So if you don't put any extra defensive code, the application spins in errors. Now what happens here with option 2 is the one I've chosen. It is better unless you choose to manually handle exceptions in the consumer. But for this demo we're not going to do that, and we're going to use this quick method. And basically it's we are telling the value deserializer to use the error handling deserializer, and that is a wrapper. Basically you can think of it as the deserialization happens here and it uses the normal glue schema registry, and if it fails there's some extra wrapper code that's run, and that is a little more efficient. I'm trying to write the least amount of code to demonstrate, so in production you might want to play with a couple of these settings. So without these nothing works, and this is basically all of the magic of getting it working. The rest of this is unimportant and very specific to Spring. The only other thing that is really useful to know is that when you add this AWS credential provider as a bean, it gets picked up very nicely for use for authenticating against MSK as well as the glue schema registry. Now the last thing is the Kafka consumer. So as you can see, it's a component, and when the application starts, this is the long-running service that will be running, listening to the following Kafka topic, which comes from our environment variables, and that topic, or the consumer, will have this particular group ID. And the group ID is where all the offsets are going to be saved. Now you can see the configuration that I showed in the previous example was all to give us a generic record. Basically we take binary off Kafka, and the deserialization middleware will bring it into a generic record. And I'll step through this code and show you what it looks like. So I'm going to try to run this now, and I have a custom run configuration already configured here with a particular consumer credentials. So I'm just going to show you where I've set the environment variables, so that's very important. As you can see here in the environment variables, you have to set the access key, bootstrap address, group ID, etc. So now I'm setting these, so whenever I run, it will be using those environment variables. Again, if you are deploying this in production, you'll set those in your Docker container or whatever target environment is running this code. It'll have to be set there. Now you'll get those properties from Amelco themselves, and we will give you specific credentials to connect, and you can consult the documentation to understand which topic to use. Just to remind you why those are important. So I'm going to go and put a breakpoint in the consumer here. So I have a breakpoint and I'm going to debug. What I'm expecting, because I have reset the offset, I'm expecting to get a couple of messages from the beginning of time. It's just starting up and authenticating. Cool. Now I've got the first message, and you can see it's a generic message. Generic record message, and you can see that already the schema is here. As you can see, this is human readable. So this is the Avro message. It's deserialized into a generic message. If you want to learn more about it, you can go check out the Avro libraries. This is an Avro concept. But basically, if you want to get any of the fields, you can reference them using the keys. You can also have a reference to the exact schema, so the schema is inbuilt inside the generic record, so you can always see what schema version you're busy deserializing. And of course, I have not handled anything. All I'm doing is printing it out. As you can see, it's printing out that we've received these messages. Now, depending on your use case, you would want to customize what happens here. So this example shows a single event processing architecture where you would be processing a single event. Now you might want to do something else with this, but that's all up to you and your use case.